The Devil's Bargain. Part 1. Mary Caldwell let her eyelids flutter shut and allowed her body to go limp against the saloon's sticky bar, her fingers loosening around the whiskey glass as if the amber liquid had finally claimed her consciousness. Through barely parted lashes, she watched Sheriff Tom Brennan's weathered face crease into a satisfied smirk, his hand already reaching for the leather satchel he'd kept close all evening. The Dusty Rose Saloon had emptied out early that night, unusual for a Saturday in Copper Ridge. Even old Pete, the piano player, had packed up his sheet music and headed home, leaving only the creak of settling wood and the distant howl of desert wind to fill the silence. Mary had noticed how Brennan had been buying drinks for anyone still lingering, generous with silver coins until the last patron stumbled out into the moonless night. Now it was just the two of them, and whatever devil's business the sheriff had in mind. "Well now, Mary darlin'," Brennan's voice carried a gravelly satisfaction as he moved around the bar. "Seems you finally met your match in that bottle." Mary fought to keep her breathing steady as his boots approached, each step deliberate on the warped floorboards. She'd been suspicious of Tom Brennan for months now, ever since the stage robberies started up along the Tucson route. 3 coaches hit in as many weeks, always when they carried payroll for the silver mines, always with details that only someone with inside knowledge could have known. The sheriff's hand touched her shoulder, and she forced herself not to recoil. Through her lashes, she saw him lean closer, his breath reeking of tobacco and cheap whiskey. "You've been asking too many questions around town, Miss Caldwell," he murmured, his fingers brushing a strand of her dark hair away from her face. "Questions about things that ain't your concern." Mary had come to Copper Ridge 6 months ago, telling folks she was a widow looking to start fresh after losing her husband to consumption back in Missouri. It was a lie, of course. The truth was considerably more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. She was a Pinkerton detective sent west to investigate reports of corruption in the territorial law enforcement, and Sheriff Brennan had become her primary suspect. "Reckon it's time you'll learn what happens to folks who can't mind their own business," Brennan continued, his hand now resting on the Colt .45 at his hip. The saloon's bat-wing doors creaked open, and Mary heard the jingle of spurs across the threshold. Heavy boots, 2 sets, moving with the careful precision of man accustomed to violence. "She out cold, Sheriff?" The voice was nasal and thin, belonging to Deputy Marcus Webb, Brennan's right hand and likely co-conspirator. "Cold as a mountain stream," Brennan replied, straightening up. "Get the horses ready. We'll take her out to Devil's Canyon, same as we did with that nosy drummer last month." Mary's blood ran cold. Samuel Morrison, the traveling salesman, had supposedly fallen from his horse and broken his neck in a ravine. She'd suspected foul play, but had no proof. Now she was about to become the next victim of their cover-up. "What about her things?" asked the second voice, deeper and rougher. Mary recognized it as belonging to Jake Colton, a drifter who'd been hanging around town lately, always seeming to have money despite no visible means of employment. "Search her room at the boarding house later," Brennan said. "Burn anything that looks important. Far as anyone knows, the grieving widow finally drank herself to death and wandered off into the desert." Mary felt rough hands slide under her arms, lifting her from the bar stool. She let her head loll back naturally, maintaining the pretense of unconsciousness while her mind raced through possible escape scenarios. Her small derringer was tucked into her boot, but she'd need the right moment to reach for it. 3 armed men against her single shot? The odds weren't encouraging. They carried her outside into the crisp desert night, where the stars painted silver shadows across the dusty Main Street. Two horses waited at the hitching post, saddlebags bulging with what Mary assumed was stolen payroll money. "Put her on my horse," Brennan ordered. "Jake, you ride double with Webb." As they hoisted her up onto Brennan's mount, Mary caught sight of a familiar silhouette emerging from the shadows between the general store and the barber shop. Captain Henry Morse, her contact from the Pinkerton office in Denver, moved with the silent grace of a man who'd spent years hunting dangerous men across hostile territory. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, and Mary saw him nod almost imperceptibly. Help was coming, but she'd need to stay alive long enough for it to arrive. Brennan swung up behind her, his arms circling her waist to keep her upright in the saddle. "Let's ride, boys. Long way to Devil's Canyon, and I want this business finished before dawn." The three horses kicked up dust clouds as they headed out of town, following the old mining road that wound through scrub brush and rocky outcroppings toward the treacherous canyon lands. Mary had ridden this way before during her investigations, mapping the territory and learning the hidden trails that crossmers used to move stolen goods. "Sheriff," Webb called out as they crested a small rise, "you sure about this? Killing a woman don't sit right with me." "She ain't just any woman, Marcus," Brennan replied, his grip tightening around Mary's waist. "She's been watching us, taking notes, asking questions about the stage robberies." "You want to hang for highway robbery? Course not, but—" "Then shut your mouth and do what needs doing," Brennan snapped. "We've come too far to grow soft now." Mary felt the sheriff's hand move to check her pulse at her wrist, and she concentrated on slowing her heartbeat, drawing on techniques she'd learned from an old Cherokee tracker during her early days with the Pinkertons. Satisfied that she remained unconscious, Brennan relaxed slightly in the saddle. As they rode deeper into the Badlands, Mary began to recognize landmarks from her previous scouting trips. The distinctive rock formation that locals called the Devil's Thumb loomed ahead, marking the entrance to the canyon where countless unfortunate souls had met their end over the years. Some had been victims of Apache raids, others had fallen prey to claim jumpers and outlaws, but lately, Mary suspected, more than a few had been murdered by the very man sworn to protect them. "Hold up," Jake called out suddenly, reining in his horse. "Thought I heard something." The three men sat motionless in their saddles, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the wind rustled through the mesquite bushes. Mary strained her ears, but heard nothing unusual. "Just the wind," Brennan said finally. "Keep moving." But Mary had heard it too, the faint but distinctive sound of hoofbeats, still far off, but growing closer. Captain Morse was following, probably with backup from the Territorial Marshal's office. She just had to survive long enough for help to arrive. The trail began to descend now, winding between towering rock walls that blocked out most of the starlight. This was Devil's Canyon, a maze of twisted passages and hidden caves where a man could disappear forever. Mary had explored some of these passages during daylight, but at night they became a treacherous labyrinth. "This'll do," Brennan announced as they reached a wide clearing surrounded by sheer cliff walls. "Far enough from town that no one'll hear the shot." He dismounted and pulled Mary down from the horse, letting her body crumple to the rocky ground. Through barely opened eyes, she saw him draw his pistol, the metal gleaming dully in the starlight. "Hold on now, Sheriff," Webb protested, climbing down from his own mount. "Maybe we should just leave her here. Desert'll take care of her quick enough." "Can't take that chance," Brennan replied, cocking the hammer on his Colt. "She wakes up, finds her way back to town, starts talking, we're all dancing at the end of a rope." Mary tensed, ready to make her move. Her hand inched toward her boot and the hidden derringer, but she knew she'd have to time it perfectly. One shot against three armed men, in near darkness, with rocky canyon walls that could deflect bullets in unpredictable directions. Besides, Brennan continued, she's seen too much already. Knows about the payroll jobs, probably figured out we've been selling information to Miguel Santana's gang down in Mexico. Can't have that kind of loose end walking around. The mention of Santana's name confirmed Mary's suspicions about the scope of the corruption. The Mexican bandit leader had been hitting American mining operations along the border with uncanny accuracy, always knowing exactly when and where to strike for maximum profit. If Brennan was feeding him information, it explained how the robberies had been so successful. "Time to say goodnight, Miss Mary Caldwell," Brennan said, raising his pistol. The sound of hoofbeats suddenly echoed off the canyon walls, much closer now and coming fast. Multiple riders moving with purpose through the treacherous terrain. "What the hell?" Jake started to say, but his words were cut off by the sharp crack of a rifle shot from somewhere up on the canyon rim. Mary rolled aside as chaos erupted around her, men shouting and horses rearing in panic. This was her chance. Part 2. Mary's hand found the small derringer in her boot just as Sheriff Brennan spun toward the sound of approaching riders, his attention momentarily diverted from his intended victim. She came up in a crouch, the little pistol steady in her grip, and put a bullet center mass into Jake Colton's chest before he could clear leather with his own weapon. "She's awake!" Webb shouted, diving for cover behind a boulder as more rifle shots rang out from the canyon rim above. Brennan whirled back toward Mary, his Colt swinging in her direction, but she was already rolling behind the horses, using their bulk as cover. The animals, spooked by the gunfire, reared and whinnied, their iron-shod hooves striking sparks from the rocky ground. "You backstabbing witch!" Brennan roared, firing wild shots that ricocheted off the canyon walls with deadly whines. From her position behind the agitated horses, Mary could see muzzle flashes winking like deadly fireflies from positions along the canyon rim. Captain Morse had brought backup all right, probably every honest lawman he could find in the territory. The sound of their rifles created a thunderous echo that seemed to shake the very walls of Devil's Canyon. "Sheriff!" Webb called out from behind his boulder. "We gotta get out of here! Whole damn army up there!" "Not without finishing her!" Brennan snarled, advancing on Mary's position with his pistol extended. But Mary was no longer where he expected her to be. Years of Pinkerton training had taught her to never stay in one place during a gunfight, and she'd use the cover of the panicked horses to slip away into the shadows at the base of the canyon wall. From there, she could see both Brennan and Webb clearly, while remaining virtually invisible herself. The Derringer was a single-shot weapon, now empty, but Mary had other resources. Her fingers found the smooth handle of the Bowie knife she kept sheathed at the small of her back, a weapon that had saved her life more than once during her years as a detective. "Come out, Mary!" Brennan called, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Make this easy on yourself!" Instead of replying, Mary began moving silently along the base of the canyon wall, using every shadow and outcropping to mask her approach. Above, the rifle fire had slackened somewhat, suggesting that Morse's men were repositioning for a better angle of attack. Webb broke cover first, making a desperate run for the horses with the clear intention of fleeing the canyon. He made it 3 steps before a rifle bullet from above dropped him face first into the dirt, his deputy's badge glinting once in the starlight before the darkness claimed him. "Marcus!" Brennan shouted, momentarily distracted by the death of his accomplice. That moment of inattention was all Mary needed. She stepped out of the shadows like an avenging angel, her knife blade reflecting the starlight as it swept across Brennan's gun hand. The sheriff screamed and dropped his Colt, blood streaming from severed tendons. "It's over, Tom," Mary said, her voice calm despite the thundering of her heart. Brennan clutched his wounded hand to his chest, his face twisted with pain and rage. "You don't understand what you've done," he gasped. "Santana's expecting another payroll shipment next week. When it don't come, he'll know someone talked." "Let me worry about Miguel Santana," Mary replied, keeping the knife pointed at Brennan's throat. "Right now, you need to worry about staying alive long enough to stand trial." The sheriff's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Trial? You think there'll be a trial? Hell, woman, you don't know half of what's been going on in this territory." "Then why don't you enlighten me?" Brennan's eyes darted toward the canyon entrance, where the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. "Santana's got people everywhere. Judges, marshals, even some folks in the territorial governor's office. You think killing me and my boys is gonna stop anything?" Mary felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night air. If Brennan was telling the truth, the corruption went far deeper than anyone at the Pinkerton office had suspected. "Names," she said, pressing the knife point against his throat. "Give me names." "Go to hell," Brennan spat. The hoofbeats were very close now, and Mary could hear Captain Morse's voice calling her name. She was about to respond when she heard something else, the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked, coming from somewhere behind her in the shadows. "Drop the knife, lady." Mary's blood turned to ice water. The voice was young, maybe 18 or 19, with the cocky drawl of a kid trying to sound tougher than he was. She turned her head slowly and saw a lanky figure emerging from a crevice in the canyon wall, an old Spencer rifle trained on her back. "Well, it'll be damned," Brennan said, his voice regaining some of its confidence. "Billy Hutchins, thought you were supposed to be watching the horses back at Willow Creek." "Changed my mind, Sheriff," the young man replied. "Good thing, too, looks like." Mary cursed herself for not doing a more thorough reconnaissance of the canyon before the shooting started. The kid must have been positioned as a lookout, probably with orders to stay hidden unless things went wrong. "Billy Hutchins," she said, keeping her voice conversational. "That'd make you old Dan Hutchins' boy, wouldn't it? The one who died in the cave-in at the Lucky Strike mine last spring." "What's it to you?" the kid demanded, but Mary heard the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Your daddy was a good man, Billy. Honest, hard-working, never hurt anybody in his life. What do you think he'd say about you running with the likes of Tom Brennan?" "Shut up," Billy shouted. "You don't know nothing about my daddy." But Mary could see that her words were having an effect. The rifle barrel wavered slightly, and the kid's eyes showed the internal struggle between loyalty to his dead father's memory and whatever hold Brennan had over him. "I know he died trying to earn honest wages to support his family," Mary continued. "I know he never stole so much as a penny from anybody. And I know he'd be ashamed to see his son holding a gun on a woman for the benefit of corrupt lawmen and Mexican bandits." "Billy," Brennan warned, "don't listen to her lies." But the damage was done. The kid's hands were shaking now, and Mary could see tears glistening on his cheeks in the starlight. "She ain't lying, is she, Sheriff?" Billy whispered. "That's what this is all about, ain't it? Stealing from folks, selling out to Santana's gang? Boy, you better—" "Shut up!" Billy screamed, swinging the rifle toward Brennan. "Just shut the hell up!" Mary saw her chance and took it, diving away from both men as Captain Morse and his posse finally rode into the canyon clearing, their guns drawn and ready for action. "This is Captain Morse, Pinkerton Detective Agency," the captain called out, his voice carrying the authority of federal law. "Drop your weapons and surrender." Billy Hutchins took one look at the assembled lawmen and threw down his rifle, raising his hands high above his head. "Don't shoot! I'm done! I'm done with all of this!" Brennan, still clutching his wounded hand, made one last desperate grab for his fallen colt, but Mary's boot came down hard on his wrist, pinning it to the rocky ground. "It's over, Tom," she said again. "Time to face the music." As Morse's men secured the scene and tended to the wounded, Mary walked to the edge of the canyon clearing and looked up at the star-filled sky. The immediate danger was past, but Brennan's words about the scope of the corruption haunted her. If he was telling the truth, this night's work was just the beginning. "Mary," Captain Morse approached, his weathered face creased with concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Captain," she replied, though she was anything but fine. "But we've got a bigger problem than we thought." She quickly filled him in on Brennan's claims about corruption reaching into the highest levels of territorial government. Morse listened with growing alarm, his expression darkening with each revelation. "Jesus Christ," he muttered when she finished, "if even half of what he's saying is true." "We need to get him to talk," Mary said. "Names, dates, details, everything." But when they turned back toward where Brennan had been lying, they found only a growing pool of blood and an empty space. In the confusion of securing Billy Hutchins and checking on the other casualties, somehow the sheriff had managed to slip away into the maze of canyon passages. "Son of a bitch," Morse swore. "How the hell?" His words were cut off by the sound of hoofbeats echoing from deeper in the canyon, rapidly fading into the distance. He had another way out, Mary realized. Probably scouted this place beforehand, knew every trail and hidey hole. Morse detailed 2 of his men to pursue Brennan, but Mary doubted they'd catch him in the darkness. The sheriff knew this country too well, and even wounded, he had enough of a head start to make good his escape. "What about the kid?" Morse asked, nodding toward Billy Hutchins, who sat on a boulder with his head in his hands, sobbing quietly. Mary looked at the young man and saw not a hardened criminal, but a confused boy who'd made some terrible choices. "He might be our best chance at unraveling this whole mess," she said, "if we handle him right." Part 3. 3 days later, Mary sat across from Billy Hutchins in the makeshift jail they'd set up in the back room of Copper Ridge's general store. The kid looked younger than his 19 years, his face pale and drawn from lack of sleep and the weight of his conscience. "I never wanted nobody to get hurt, Miss Caldwell," he said for the 3rd time that morning. "Sheriff Brennan, he said we were just evening the score, taking from the mining companies that got rich off the backs of folks like my daddy." Mary kept her voice gentle but firm. "Billy, those payrolls you helped steal, that wasn't money belonging to rich mining bosses. That was wages meant for working men, miners like your father. Every dollar you took put food off some family's table." The boy's shoulders shook with renewed sobs, and Mary felt a pang of sympathy despite everything he'd done. Captain Morse had wanted to ship him straight to the territorial prison in Yuma, but Mary had convinced him that Billy might be more valuable as a witness than as a convict. "I want to make it right," Billy whispered. "Tell me how to make it right. Start by telling me everything you know about Sheriff Brennan's operation. Every name, every detail, no matter how small it seems." Over the next hour, Billy painted a picture of corruption that was even worse than Mary had imagined. Brennan hadn't just been feeding information to Miguel Santana's gang. He'd been actively coordinating with territorial officials to ensure that certain shipments were inadequately guarded, that pursuit would be slow and misdirected, and that any investigations would be buried under bureaucratic delays. Judge Aldrich was in on it, Billy revealed, his voice barely above a whisper. And Marshal Crawford, the one supposed to be cleaning up the territory. Hell, Miss Caldwell, even some of the mine owners were getting a cut, claiming bigger losses than they really had for the insurance money. Mary felt sick to her stomach. The entire law enforcement structure of the Arizona Territory was rotten to the core, a carefully orchestrated criminal enterprise that had been bleeding the region dry for years. "What about Santana himself?" she asked. "Did you ever meet him?" Billy shook his head. "Never saw him face to face. but Sheriff Brennan talked about him like they were old friends. Said they'd served together in the war, down in Mexico during the French occupation. Claimed they had an understanding that went way back. That explained a lot. If Brennan and Santana had a history together, it would account for the level of trust and coordination between their operations. It also meant that Brennan's escape from Devil's Canyon hadn't been random. He'd known exactly where to go. "Billy," Mary said, leaning forward across the rough wooden table, "I need you to think very carefully about this next question. Did Sheriff Brennan ever mention a place where he might go if things went bad? A hideout? A safe house? Somewhere across the border, maybe?" The young man was quiet for a long moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There was something," he said finally. "He mentioned a place called Casa del Diablo, down in Sonora. Said it was where old soldiers went when they needed to disappear." Mary felt a surge of excitement. Casa del Diablo, the Devil's House, was a notorious outlaw stronghold in the mountains south of the border, supposedly impregnable and protected by corrupt Mexican officials. If Brennan had fled there, it would explain why Morse's men had lost his trail at the Rio Grande. A commotion outside interrupted her thoughts. Through the store's front window, she could see a cloud of dust approaching from the east, kicked up by what looked like a dozen riders moving fast. Mary's hand instinctively moved to her holstered Colt as she recognized the distinctive sombreros and crossed bandoliers of Mexican raiders. "Billy," she said urgently, "get down behind the counter and stay quiet." But the young man was staring out the window in terror, his face white as a sheet. "Oh, God," he whispered, "that's them. That's Santana's boys." Mary drew her pistol and moved to the window for a better look. The riders were spreading out as they approached the town, their weapons visible and their intent clearly hostile. At their head rode a man she recognized from wanted posters, Miguel Santana himself, a lean, mustached figure whose reputation for ruthlessness was legendary throughout the borderlands. The front door burst open and Captain Morse rushed in, his own weapon drawn. "Mary, we've got trouble. Santana's here with at least 15 men, maybe more coming behind them." "How did they know we were here?" Mary demanded. "Brennan," Morse replied grimly. "Had to be. Son of a bitch, led them right to us." Mary's mind raced through their options. The general store was built of thick adobe, which would stop most bullets, but it wasn't a fortress. They had perhaps 6 men total, counting herself and Morse, against a force of experienced raiders who knew the territory intimately. "Captain," she said, "take Billy and 3 of your men out the back. There's a trail that leads up into the rocks behind the town, defensive positions, good fields of fire." "What about you?" "Someone needs to buy you time to get set up," Mary replied, checking the loads in her Colt. "Besides, I've got something Santana wants." Through the window, she could see the Mexican bandit leader riding slowly down the main street, his men taking positions at strategic points around the town. Most of the residents had already fled or barricaded themselves inside their homes, leaving the dusty thoroughfare eerily quiet except for the jingle of spurs and the creak of leather. "Mary Caldwell!" Santana's voice carried clearly in the still air, his English accented but precise. "I know you are in there, señorita. We have business to discuss, you and I." Mary stepped out onto the store's front porch, her hands visible but close to her weapons. "I'm here, Santana. What do you want?" The bandit leader dismounted and walked closer, his own hands resting casually on the butts of his twin pistols. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with intelligent dark eyes and the bearing of a man accustomed to command. "What I want, señorita, is very simple," he said with a slight smile. "You have caused me considerable inconvenience by disrupting my arrangement with Sheriff Brennan. I am here to collect compensation for my losses." "Your losses?" Mary laughed harshly. "You mean the money you stole from honest working men?" "I mean the business relationship that put food on the tables of my men and their families," Santana replied, his voice hardening. "You have upset a delicate balance, señorita. Now that balance must be restored." Mary could hear movement behind the store, Morse and his men getting into position, she hoped. She needed to keep Santana talking for a few more minutes. "Where's Tom Brennan?" she asked. "Figured he'd be here with you, seeing as how you two are such old friends." Santana's expression darkened. "Sheriff Brennan is indisposed. It seems he was not entirely truthful about certain aspects of our arrangement, a character flaw that has been permanently corrected." Mary felt a chill. If Santana had killed Brennan, it meant he was tying up loose ends, preparing to disappear back across the border. But first, he apparently intended to settle accounts with everyone who had disrupted his operation. "I'll make you an offer, señorita," Santana continued. "You and your friends surrender peacefully, and I will ensure your deaths are quick and clean. Resist, and I will be forced to demonstrate why my name is feared from Texas to Durango." "Counteroffer," Mary replied, drawing her Colt in one smooth motion. "You and your men ride out of here now, and I won't put a bullet in your black heart." Santana's laugh was genuinely amused. "Ah, señorita, you have the spirit of a true frontier woman. It is almost a pity that—" His words were cut off by the sharp crack of rifle fire from the rocks behind the town. One of his men toppled from his saddle, clutching a shoulder wound, and suddenly the street erupted in chaos as Morse's men opened up from their concealed positions. Mary dove for cover behind a wooden water trough as bullets began flying in all directions. Santana's raiders were experienced fighters, but they'd been caught in the open by opponents who held the high ground, always a disadvantage in any gunfight. "Fuego! Fuego!" Santana shouted to his men, drawing his own pistols and returning fire toward the rocks. Mary waited for her moment, then rose from behind the trough and put a bullet center mass into one of the bandits who was trying to flank Morse's position. The man spun and fell, his rifle clattering away across the hard-packed dirt. But Santana's men were veterans of countless border raids, and they quickly adapted to the tactical situation. Using their superior numbers, they began a coordinated assault on the rocky positions, some providing cover and fire, while others advanced under its protection. Mary realized that despite their advantageous positions, Morse's small force couldn't hold out indefinitely against such overwhelming odds. They needed reinforcements, and they needed them fast. As if in answer to her prayers, she heard the thunder of hoofbeats approaching from the west, a large body of riders moving at full gallop. Through the gun smoke and dust, she could make out the glint of silver badges and the blue uniforms of cavalry troopers. The territorial marshal had arrived with a full company of soldiers. Santana heard them coming too, and his tactical situation changed in an instant from advantageous to hopeless. Caught between Morse's riflemen in the rocks and a cavalry charge from the plains, his raiders faced annihilation if they continued the fight. "Retirada!" the bandit leader shouted. "Vámonos!" But as his men began their fighting withdrawal toward the Mexican border, Santana himself turned back toward Mary with murder in his eyes. Whatever else happened, he apparently intended to settle his score with the woman who had destroyed his carefully constructed criminal empire. Mary saw him coming and knew she had time for only one shot before he reached her position. The distance was perhaps 30 yards, long range for a pistol, especially with battle chaos swirling all around them. She steadied her Colt against the edge of the water trough, took careful aim at Santana's advancing figure, and squeezed the trigger just as he raised his own weapon toward her. Both shots fired simultaneously, the reports blending into a single thunderous crack that seemed to echo forever in the confined space of the town's main street. Santana stumbled, looked down in surprise at the spreading red stain on his white shirt, then pitched forward face first into the dust. Mary felt a burning sensation along her left arm and realized that his bullet had grazed her, leaving a shallow but bloody furrow. A few inches to the right, and the story would have ended very differently. By the time the cavalry reached the town, the surviving raiders had melted away into the desert, leaving behind only their dead and wounded. The immediate threat was over, but Mary knew that word of Santana's death would soon spread throughout the borderlands, potentially creating a power vacuum that might lead to even more violence. As the sun set over Copper Ridge that evening, Mary sat on the porch of the general store, her wounded arm bandaged and her report to the Pinkerton office nearly complete. Billy Hutchins had agreed to testify before a federal grand jury about the corruption he'd witnessed, and Captain Morse was already making plans to clean house throughout the territorial law enforcement apparatus. It would be a long and difficult process, Mary knew, rooting out corruption that had taken years to establish. But for the first time since arriving in Arizona territory, she felt like they had a real chance of success. The devil's bargain that had corrupted the frontier for so long was finally coming to an end.